Any chance of talking you into sharing video, Karsten?
Excuse me?
Is there any chance of talking you into sharing video?
Uh, Unfortunately, I'm sitting at the laptop that tends to overheat if I do that, so I'd rather not do that.
Yeah. Generally with these workshops and meetings, I try to get as many people on the screen as I can. Just try to make it feel like a around the table session.
Yeah, I like that idea very much, but I'm not going to get up for that.
We'll give it a few minutes for more people to join. Greg, you should add yourself to the notes page. All right, we're going to get started very soon. If you are able to share video, please do so. We want to make this a meeting around the table. We are scheduled for an hour. I'm willing to run over. We can go until Miyako kicks us off. But anybody that needs to drop at the end of the hour can. Let's try to get as much of our agenda covered as we can in that hour. Hopefully everybody knows where the notes page is. If you don't, help each other out, ask in the chat. Other people can point you there. If you're not familiar with notes, note that at the top there's the ability to edit. I prefer the pane that lets you see two columns, both the edit column and the render column. Try that out if you haven't tried it out already. Jump in now, and if you're not already, if you're here and you're not already marked as attending, mark yourself so. And if you're not on the attendee list already, add yourself, please. The session is being recorded, and it will become available in the YouTube channels as an interim meeting of the tools group. I don't think we need a dedicated note taker, given that we are being recorded. If we need to go back and pull detailed notes out of it, and do so by referring to the recording. But I would appreciate if there are particularly salient points captured as we are talking, that somebody just hammer it in as an observation that we made on the notes page. It's easier to work with things that we capture as we go along than it is backfilling after the fact. So the setup for this is that we've had several years of discussion at this point around what we might do differently around making our artifacts available to people on the internet at large. Looking at it both from the facet of how do we promote efficient work among our community members, as well as how do we make our artifacts accessible, easily accessible to the people that aren't making standards, but the people that are using them. So, or any of the other work products of the IETF and its related communities. So we've got several websites. We've grown organically. There are different decisions made in the different properties that we have. We have had rsync endpoints. We've got rsync endpoints. They're not consistently engineered. We have pieces of the www tree that show these various artifacts, RFCs and IDs in particular, in not obvious ways to the outside world. There's a history of the outside world referring to tools.ietf.org, baking in links to tooling at places like Stack Exchange. What we want to talk about today is whether or not we can do things differently, what that different might look like, to try to get a more unified and more accessible view and something that's more effective for the people that are working on building our work product, as well as making it easier for people to use our work product in the end run. I think the conversation is quite likely to be dominated by discussions about how we handle internet drafts and RFCs, but as we're talking, please remember that we've got a bunch of other things. We've got meeting proceedings, slides from the meetings. We've got these other kinds of documents like status changes, where we move things from proposed standard to full standard, or from proposed standard to obsoleted or historic, that should live pretty much at the same level as RFCs. There's a list in the notes document of some of the other things that we've got that we want to make sure that we are considering as we're discussing. I see some people have already started adding discussion points. Feel free to do that as you go along. Something comes up that you want to think we should talk about during this time. Just jump in and edit. The document is available for anybody that's logged in to start talking. I got a late regret from Jay. He's had something come up at the very last minute. He may not make it until late in the call, if at all. So let's bash what is in the for discussion session. Is there any, I more or less listed it in the priority order that I thought we should discuss things in. If you see anything further down that you think is more important to get to earlier in the discussion, call it out now. I definitely do not want to be the one talking for most of this hour. I've got my strong opinions. I've kind of put them into the background of this document already. Carson sent an email shortly before the meeting already. If anybody here hasn't seen that already, I encourage you to go skim it right quick. It went to Tools Discuss. And if anybody has opinions that they want to put down in a long form by email later, feel free to do that as well. So let's go ahead and jump in. Let's start with this first bullet. We've got right now things spread between different sites. We've got I'm going to assert legacy and maybe unfriendly to the outside world division of things that are supposed to be at the RFC editor and things that are supposed to be at the website and things that are supposed to be at the data tracker. I'd like to challenge this, and this is what is in Karsten's message, for our work products, for the documents that people are going to come look at. Why do we not just put them at one place and make that place the thing that we train all the search engines to go to, that we run up to the highest point on the SEO, and that we encourage places like Stack Exchange and other external organizations that are linking programmatically to link to. What is the downside of pursuing a path like that? Whether its name is docs.ietf.org or what, I think is a separate conversation, but what's the downside of pushing things to being a single pile? I'm really expecting Alexis and, Alice to jump in here.
Seem to be
Go
my
ahead. And I don't think there's so many people here that we really need to use the queue mechanism. Just unmute and start talking, please.
I don't think there's much of a downside to consolidating. That doesn't strike me as bad. But what does strike me as bad is changing the archival URLs of RFCs. If we've spent 53 years saying this is the URL for an RFC, please use this URL, well, not 53 years, I understand, but a very long period of time, telling people that that's the archival URL, and we change the archival URL. That didn't seem like a good plan. I don't have a theoretical issue with them all being in the same place. I just want to call out that particular issue.
So is it still about URLs continue to exist but redirect to this common place that we're discussing? And it would be an easy redirect pattern to set up.
Are we sure that the redirect works for any case?
Say more?
I mean, I think you need a real browser to follow the redirect. Maybe some other tools will not follow the redirect. Non-compliant tools, right? But just to give you an example, right? So I was using some script in generating PDF, and they changed somehow the URL for the image inside the PDF changed, and the PDF generator was unable to generate the image anymore. So it's a corner case, right? But if we do redirect, we need to be sure, for instance, we are serving the same MIME types as well.
Sure.
The only case I can, sorry, there's a lot of latency. It makes it hard to just jump in. The only case I can think of where we might worry about having a single sort of URL or domain for all of them is if we want to brand the different streams differently. For example, if you want to put the IRTF ones on an IRTF domain or the independent stream ones, and it's a different domain to the IETF stream, for example.
All right. Would that be something that you think we should do to the IRTF stream?
I mean, if we need to say to the end user, right, the consumer of our artifacts, oh, this is IRTF, you need to go there. Oh, this is IETF, you need to go there. Oh, it's ICE, you need to go there. We are losing, right?
Yeah, we're losing equally if we're trying to brand the IRTF as somewhere where research happens and we keep pointing to the IETF. That distinction between this is a research thing and this is a standards thing gets ever harder to claim. So I'm not sure what the right answer is here, but that's, if it's rfceditor.org, that problem goes away. If it's an IETF.org domain, then that has branding issues.
Yeah, well, so drafts, I think, are used by both of those streams, all of those streams, and those wouldn't live at rfceditor.org.
Yeah, I mean, probably the answer is we just use an IETF.org domain for it all. But, yeah, if you're asking me to think of potential problems, that's one I can think of.
And that's exactly the kind of things that I would like to pull out in this conversation.
Just to call it out, you just said internet drafts wouldn't live at rfceditor.org. Why?
So main working property, okay, I'll answer that directly. There is already a very difficult problem that we have with signaling to the people that aren't working on standards whether something is a standards track document or not. Right? So if something has been approved, even has consensus to be published as an RFC, and if we suddenly have internet drafts, which anybody can throw anything at all up as an internet draft showing up at rfceditor.org, then we're going to exacerbate that confusion quite a bit. So if we move to a single site, I don't think that single site should be labeled rfceditor.org, because it does then imply that this is the place where approved things live, as opposed to this is the set of all resources.
So I would say that the reverse is also true then. Meaning putting the RFCs, these are approved and published, onto something like data tracker, IETF.org, implies the opposite, right? That everything is provisional. So I think what you said argues for keeping things separate.
As opposed to having a docs.ietf.org, which the name implies nothing, right? The data tracker would then talk about metadata and point to docs when people want to consume something.
Yeah, I put this in chat as a...
Because they are like, if proceedings and meeting minutes and things that we don't consider to be maybe on the same level as a published RFC, all live at doc.ietf or docs.ietf. Don't we have the same problem with people's perception?
Carson, you have thoughts on that?
Well, I wrote in my little piece that I don't, let me check whether I can fix the audio 1 second.
Yeah, you're coming through.
Yeah, but I'm having a problem with this AGC. Anyway, So I wrote that I didn't really think about that very much. I'm really mostly interested in getting our working documents easy to peruse. It's quite usual to find an RFC number or a draft name somewhere, and it needs to be easy to build UI out of that manually or semi manually. So that's really important to me. Whether the other documents are as easy to access from the browser address line is less important to me. But in any case, I would prefer a situation where everything that is under this common access point is clearly labeled. So we are not putting out raw text files or even HTML files where you have to know really a lot about the process to understand whether these are drafts or completed documents. I would like to have that information in a top bar in the document every time. So that's why I wrote there needs to be a working page form, which is probably similar to how we have been doing HTMLized, except that maybe we do the status information even more in your face than we do it with HTMLized. So I think we can even have different colors for different screens and things like that. I'm not proposing this right now, but that's certainly something that this approach would allow us to do. So I don't have a strong opinion on all these other things that we need to look at. I mainly care about the actual documents, IDs, and RFCs.
So you've segued a bit into the next discussion point, which is what we should point to, whether or not we have things that point to a landing page or things that point to the document content. I'll summarize. Your opinion is yes, the page that we land on should do both of those things. That it should be content forward, but clearly labeled with the metadata.
Yes.
So to be very clear, the idea of a landing page that doesn't show the document content is something you'd like to get away from.
Yes.
I would
Yeah.
agree with that. I mean, the SEO implications of not having the content there is one of the reasons why RFC editor doesn't show up when you search for RFCs in Google, right? So if we've disadvantaged rfceditor.org, our archival place for showing these RFCs, by not putting the content there.
Yeah, I would also agree with that, although I would like a canonical sort of obvious URL for getting the raw content, so machine-based tools can process it. But
but
yeah,
that
the
can be
default
linked.
landing page.
That can be linked off the landing page. So I
Sure.
think it's really important to have unadulterated archival raw content somewhere. And we need this for tools. We need this to sign them, even if the content of the landing page might change all the time because of different status and so on. But if we can keep these two universes separate from each other, we simplify things for people a lot.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So, we'll toss out docs-raw.ietf.org just to see if anybody says, no, that's not what I meant. Okay.
I don't much care whether it's docs-raw or just a regular URL on docs.itf.org, same as the other
Yeah.
one. But as long as
Some extension.
But I
Yeah,
agree that the default should be the landing page with the metadata
Yeah.
and the brand.
I just note that large services that have to deal with the distributed content are opting more often for using different domain names because it allows you to scale the service underneath what's happening differently. So maybe even choose radically different technologies. But since we're talking about serving the raw the actual document content in the page that also has the metadata, that separation may not it may not be as strong of a design requirement to consider. Okay. I'll go ahead and start ticking through some of the other discussion points. Feel free to run back to these other two if we discover a thought that we should come back to as we move forward. There is this notion of having a pronoun, if you would, that always gets to the current version of a foo, right? Current version of a draft, current version of some minutes, whatever. I haven't been seeing a lot of pushback against providing this service. Should that service exist at the same place as docs.ietf.org? If we consolidate on a single place, is it important that the service that lets you find current live at exactly that same place?
But what does current mean? So if I go for RFC 2246, should I get the current version of TLS? Should I get the internet draft that has the newest BIS for that? So I think we have to be a bit careful about this current thing. So on one hand, we would like to guide people who are looking for old versions of a document that have been obsoleted by newer ones. We would like to guide them to look at the newer ones. That's one thing. But of course, we don't want to go too far and offer a BIS document that isn't even agreed on at the same time. So I think we will have to do some of that using links and not using automatic redirects or something like that. On the other hand, having a pointer in a document that points to the most recent version of an internet draft is definitely a function that we need to provide. So I think we need to do both, but maybe with different semantics.
Yeah,
So
it's possible. But have a latest on some things that only exist in one version and don't have this option.
So I think I'm hearing that we would have metadata on pages where there are relationships like replaces, obsoleted, whatever, that we would point out that these relationships exist, and that you might, and maybe even point out more than one depth. If, A was obsoleted by B, which was obsoleted by C, we want to definitely, make sure that you see C early on and not just be pointed only to B. But then there is the question about things that already just have sequence numbers, like drafts, internet drafts, minutes, things like that. Being able to refer to those things by pronoun so that you don't have to know the version, you just get latest. I mean, when I come back, I don't feel like I think that what Karsten brought up is important, that we pay attention to these as separate things. But just returning to the just this, how do I get to the end of a sequence? Does that service, is that something that should the URLs for that live at the same place as the place that you're serving the docs? Is that important, or can it be somewhere else? I think Karsten would argue that it's important that we're training people's fingers to type things, and there should just be
Yeah.
brains only get programmed one way instead of two ways.
So let me give an example where the distinction is not so clear. So many documents start as individual documents and have version 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they become working group documents and start being 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And we already have endless problems with people referring to -04 of the foo document, and you don't know whether they actually are talking about the individual and the working group document. So this can be very confusing for people, and people tend to use some browser cached stuff that then turns out to be a very old version of the individual document, and so on. So having an automatic progression from an individual document to a working group document can be a very useful thing. On the other hand, you of course do want to be able to access individual versions of a document when it still was in individual stage. Yeah, I think we really have to look at the use cases and the kinds of confusion that we actually see today. So I actually would argue that working group documents should number from the last number that the individual document had, so you never have that confusion. But that's a separate issue. Don't have to discuss this right now. But that's an example where you actually want to jump through a transition as seamlessly as possible.
Just tossing out the seamlessly as possible, I was thinking it might be nice to have a pop-up that says, hey, would you like to see the latest version of this document? We see that you are looking at an older version. Would you like to be taken to the RFC or even perhaps the BIS? Because I would like to be told when I'm looking at an RFC that there's new work on updating it. I know this would be perhaps confusing to people new to the system, but if there's like a BIS draft involved, it's like, and I'm not sure rfceditor.org should be pointing to that, but perhaps data tracker, the whole, where's the archive, where's the work being done? But I think a seamless transition, I think the user should, it should be put up in the user space, the reader space with, hey, there's something new. Do you want to go look at it? Or maybe they do want to look at the OO version. And they can say, no, I'm here because I want to be here.
I would hope that we can keep the working pages, as I call them, free of required interaction, like a pop-up, because there are still too many things that actually operate on these pages in other ways than having a human sit in front of a browser. But I do think that having something in the metadata bar that is very visible and says, hey, you are looking at an old version of this document, you really intend to do that. That would be very helpful.
So Karsten, let me poke a bit at your reticence against the pop-ups. If we are, particularly if we're greenfielding, if we do a docs.ietf.org like thing, and we create a raw.ietf.org like thing, why should we worry about the constraint that, we could just make the assumption that docs.ietf.org is consumed by browsers, full stop, and that other things should be looking in the other place. Is that wrong-headed?
No. Consumed by browsers is a pretty wide spectrum. So I'm not sure it's really as simple. So essentially that's the old tension between making something useful for novices and making something useful for experienced users. So an experienced user would get very annoyed by these pop-ups very quickly. Um, for a new user, that's very useful, and we could, of course, make preferences. So you you put in a cookie that says no, I don't want that pop-up, or yes, I do want this pop-up, which creates more complexity again. So I'm not sure I'm a big fan of that either. So if there is a point where we do have information that is in your face that tells you this is not the current version you're looking at, without going through a pop-up, even protected by a preference, I would be happy. But I agree that other solutions are possible.
And we need to take care about the Google spider running, right?
Yeah, and I'm also thinking of APIs. I mean, just there was a piece of this that was in Carson's mail that rubs up against this with the easy way to get to either the individual document or the working group document or whatever by providing fragments of the slug that we use to refer to internet drafts in particular, right? And I doubt that we have much traction with this, but I should call it into question whether or not maybe we should change the way we build our slugs going forward. I mean, we'd still have to deal with the way we build our slugs for all the slugs that we have for a ridiculous amount of history. But instead of trying to encode state into the slug, like draft IETF versus draft some person, we just move to slugs that don't have that metadata, and the slugs resolve to something where you can get to the metadata. But as I said, that's probably a step too far. Okay, so we are 37 minutes in to our hour. Let me ask the next thing that I wanted to poke at. We have, for reasons of history, a bunch of things that we serve with the same content type that have different document models behind them. I will point to HTML coming out of XML to RCV3 versus HTMLized coming out of either the ID to RSC stuff, taking text and turning it into HTML, or taking the v3 HTML and doing CSS rendering modifications to it to get something that looks like what ID to HTML produced in the first place. We have external organizations pointing into /HTML, that the HTML tree that goes after what had, until we had v3 HTML, only been the HTMLized stuff. Now they get a mix of HTMLized stuff. Well, they always get the HTMLized stuff, but we also have the v3 HTML output somewhere else. If we went to this docs thing, and when docs says, it's going to be serving somebody's going to be reading this something by default when you look at it, Carson had the proposal that it always serves HTML if it's available, and it serves HTMLized if the HTML isn't available. If the object is people reading these things, maybe that's okay. Programs going off and reading things raw somewhere else we can have distinctions in the raw between these things that would let them know what kind of document model they're going to be getting, or at least some alert that they're going to be getting a different document model across different parts of time. Is it okay for this purported docs.ietf.org service that you just get different goo depending on what level in the historic strata you happen to be looking at.
I mean, my feeling is yes, you should get whatever the best human readable form is that's available for that document. If you want a specific format, then well, we have links to specific raw formats, and you can construct the appropriate URL. But by default, you go to the best human readable, nice user-friendly page.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Personally, I have met people who actually prefer the HTMLized version over the modern HTML version, and part of that is probably something we can address by fixing the CSS at some point. But generally, we will have a small part of the constituency that has that preference, and this might actually be a place where having a preference stored in a cookie or something, or in the data tracker, might be useful.
Fundamental observation that I think just went by. What's served at these pages at this purported service can change over time.
Yes.
Sorry, just to be clear, can change or cannot change?
Can. Must
Can.
be able to, from what I just heard.
Yes.
So people actually used to submit text files as internet drafts, and then at some point they see the light and submit XML. So I finally get to look at an HTML version, and then the next version is actually submitted by someone who hasn't heard about XML yet, and who submits the text version again. So the same URI for the most recent version of a draft may switch back and forth between HTMLized and HTML all the time.
So I think that the answer to the question that was originally written, how do we explain the various formats of documents, is that we just have links to them in places where people are reading, where the links explain what are needed. And as if we build machine readable endpoints, we encode things into either MIME types or segments in the URLs, something in the tokens, something in the JSON, but the widget is explained, the differences are explained in those places.
One of the things that is kind of standard when you have an environment where you are taking an original document or media file or whatever and creating iterations of it, right? Like I'm taking a WAV file and I'm making an MP3 and I'm making an OGG and I'm making, whatever. But same thing applies here, is to, in your metadata, note how you are creating the derivative files, like which format of your software you used for it or whatever. That tends to be something that you would store in metadata rather than just, as a machine readable way of knowing what happened to different files formats in an item. And that would be probably a lot easier to keep track of over time than just putting links onto things, in my opinion.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was gonna say on this idea of providing different files that in some places there's a hierarchy. Like if you decide that HTML is what you'd like the user to be reading, then we also provide these non-normative formats, list of other formats, and another approach is this flat organization where you provide a bunch of formats, let the user choose. Don't imply a hierarchy, or give them a hierarchy. I kind of building off what Colin was saying, I'd like to see the best format be the one that's presented to the user, and then a second level where there's other formats.
All right, in interest of at least touching on all of our points, let's talk for a moment about how we should prioritize SEO optimization against the other things that are in
Can I make one point before we do that?
Sure.
If we have multiple URIs pointing to multiple renditions that represent different preferences, we have a problem because we have all those documents that have references in them. So we have to make sure that there is one reference we can put into all of our documents, at least the working page representations of that documents that you can click on, and that will show a form of the document that the person who clicks the link is not going to be repulsed by.
So, do you anticipate that we should then have all of the references in published RFCs past the point that we make this pointing to this reading place, that's going to automatically pull up the most readable copy?
Yes, but I provided an escape clause by saying that the archival version of the RFC might have a different link in it than the version that you actually show on the working page, on the per user page for the RFC.
So something to consider as what actually got published? The published document would have two links in it in the reference?
No, it would only have one link in it, which is the archival version. And the rendering process for that RFC replaces that link by a pointer to the working page.
Pointer or redirect?
Pointer. So when you look at docs IETF-org RFC 9000, the links in there will point to docs IETF-org. They will not point to the RFC editor site. That's what I'm proposing.
So you're thinking in published RFCs that even going forward, that the references to RFCs would point to the RFC editor site?
In the archival version, yes, but in the version that you actually look at docs IETF-org, they would point to docs IETF-org. So that's why I want to split these universes really hard.
I think that's going to give everybody something to chew on.
And Karsten, you had used in your example a published RFC. Are you talking about modifying the URLs in published RFCs, or just
Yes. So
RFCs?
I'm already talking about putting a top bar into that RFC. So we are already talking about modifying the published RFC and fixing the links to point to a friendlier version just meshes in with that very well.
So let me rephrase what I think you're saying, Karsten, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we wouldn't be actually modifying the RFC archival bits. We would be presenting the RFC by
Yes.
mutating it on its way to being presented.
Yes.
That feels like a recipe for disaster to me. Just showing a human being something that is not true, like a URL that isn't the real URL that the actual archival thing has in it, doesn't seem like a good idea. I'm having trouble like figuring out in my head exactly why I think that. I'm sorry, I'm not presenting a more cogent argument for it or against it, but it feels like you're going to create yourself a problem.
It should at least be very visible that it's been a changed URL. pretty much like we do the errata, right? The online errata. It's visible that something has changed.
Yes. I don't disagree with that, but I do think that presenting the RFCs in something else, but the archival form is the right thing to do, so they can be easy to use.
I mean, we
So-
have something other than the archival forms XML, which is incomprehensible to everybody.
Yeah, and don't know how long we're going to stick with that decision. So,
Yeah, I think the courts will prefer to look at the signed text files or something like that. So for me, that's part of the archival form. And we want to optimize this for a good lifetime. And that's different from what we present at doc.ietf.org, which is we present this for best usability. And as long as we have this conflict of objectives, I think the results need to be different.
so there are several questions that are left here. I'd like to at least get a light reaction from people on relative importance and, high-level answers on all of them, right? SEO optimization versus the making things easy for our community that are working with to do their work. I mean, how far up the chain should SEO optimization be in our design trade-off thinking?
Can I just have maybe a question and a observation. So I just want to make sure I understand here. The proposal is to put all documents into a single domain at the moment. This is the
That's
proposal.
one of the things that we're discussing, but whether we do that or not, I think this question still stands.
Okay. The reason that and then the observation I wanted to make, because I think it relates to SEO, is that right now one of the things that we observe is that people point to a IETF.org domain for things that are individual contributions and not actually IETF working documents yet. And so this, the docs.itf.org, I think has the potential to make those lines even blurrier, so that people would be pointing to things on docs.itf.org and saying, hey, the IETF has just published a new document. Go take a look at docs.itf.org.
We got that right now. It's www.ietf.org for the archive. I mean, this docs thing isn't going to change that at all. So if you're really wanting to change that, I think I'm hearing you propose that we have an internetdrafts.org that does not have IETF in its name at all.
Yeah, I'm not proposing a solution to it. I just want to observe that that's an issue and that we could take steps and either make it worse or better. At this might be worth considering or not.
Is there any appetite for trying to handle signaling to the outside world that internet drafts are not anything by putting them somewhere other than IETF.org?
Well, it should be visible in the document that it doesn't have status in the IETF, in the status bar. Not sure it has to be visible in the UI as well.
Yeah, and that's right, Carson. That's kind of what I think we're talking about, different wrappers for different kinds of documents. Then maybe this is another kind of wrapper that could be applied.
And Robert, would you see internet drafts moving to somewhere under IETF.org if they became adopted, or they actually had some official status then?
I haven't thought about that at all. I just observe that this is an issue we have, and that we might have an opportunity to improve it in some ways, and it wouldn't necessarily mean moving domain names for it to be improved.
Yeah, and, it's a counter pressure to what Carson's original push was for, training people to look at one place, right? So,
Yeah, it's somewhat random at what point in the development something becomes a working group document, and different working groups have different thresholds for that happening. So
and
for
trying
actually,
to process, yeah, that I think is the biggie for me. Trying to reflect the process too much in domain names is actually probably going to bite back hard.
Yeah, domain names are notoriously bad for SEO. Many people just ignore them entirely in SEO, so I wouldn't trust those for anything. But the SEO thing that I've always thought was important is the rel equals canonical header in, or whichever way, I can't remember how it works, inside any RFC or any that's not published on the RFC editor site, that then points to the canonical URL being on the RFC editor site. If we'd had that some years ago, tools.ietf.org would never have got to be the top one, because we're making a very clear statement as to where they can be found. And I think if we do it, then that also means that other people who publish their own copies of things will also begin to do it over a period of time as well. And that just drives people more to the RFC editor site. And my camera's not working, sorry, so you'll just have the disembodied voice.
So I encourage you, when you can, Jay, to listen to the recording of the first part of the call, just to see if there's anything in that conversation that would affect what you just said when your sentence contained the words RFC editor site. So. All right, we're essentially at the end of our hour. I'm sure other people have scheduled meetings. I'm willing to leave this bridge up and we can continue our conversations. But if there's anybody that has to leave, is there anything that you want to get in before you have to go? Not seeing anybody jump to the mic, so let's see. Is there anybody here that would be troubled by going for or at least some subset of us continuing to go for another 15, 20 minutes? Okay, well, let's just do this then.
I need to drop out in a minute or two, but I'm happy for everyone else to continue.
No, thank you for the time that you've given us. I'm going to reorder a little bit of what's left because I think we might be able to get to some conclusion on it. Jay had a question at the end about supporting programmatic document retrieval. Do we want to focus our efforts on using the same kinds of URI structures and using HTTP itself as the interface, or do we want to push these things more to a more modern JSON API that can run over HTTP or whatever? Carson, I think you started to answer this one.
well, for me, there is no difference between the two bullet points, so I'm not sure what the question is.
So I think that the real question comes back to some of what we were trying to tease at a moment ago. Is that, do we expect programs to consume the things that we are also expecting programs to consume? And do we constrain what we do with the pages that we're putting in front of people to carefully consider that automaton may be consuming them? So we kind of went through this once already, a little bit earlier in the call, but this is a more concrete mechanism way of asking the question. So let me flip it around this way. Is it okay if we make the assertion that the things that docs.ietf.org in the proposal, or at least the places that we put the human readable content, make the assumption that this is for humans and wetware can deal with any changes that happen along the way here, and that software and the need for the kinds of consistency that software needs to see would be served by something else?
Yeah, I would.
Having an API and being consistent in that API is the right way for software to access it, and people should use websites.
So the reason I put this in there is because I'm wondering if we constrain ourselves if we think we have to have a strict URL naming syntax that supports automated retrieval. So, for example, I can imagine us having a single-page application that shows then RFC in different formats without the URL changing, because that's the way just the way that it works, and losing the ability to then construct a URL that, say, returns the TXT file or something like that, because we don't have that in there. So that's what I'm wondering. I'm not suggesting that we should do that, but that perhaps we are making our life a bit difficult by assuming that people programmatically, or that we need to maintain compatibility for programmatic retrieval.
Well, I was going to say that I expect something like the RFC 9000.json file to feature more prominently in these APIs. So that actually should contain all the information that is needed to do the retrievals that you want to make. And we might want to generate similar files for the internet drafts as well. And that may be about all the API we need here. Yeah, single page applications certainly make sense. I would expect them to actually encode their application state in the fragment identifier, so they would still have different URIs for showing different things, but that's maybe a detail. So we could consider the landing page to be a single page application.
Well, so let me point at BibXML, the BibXML service here, with having the BibXML IDs versus BibXML IEEE versus whatever in the path, right? And the having its own unique solution for current versus not. I think that it's a worked example of where we have rather severely constrained what we could do, making the assumption that this is for machines and not for people. And it really is more for machines, right? This is something that software goes and grabs snippets from. And when we proposed with the BibXML service that people just change their software to make some JSON queries and get some API, we got back, Ralph, it's always worked this other way. Why can't we just continue to do it this other way?
Yeah, the
Right.
problem is that we have those UIs encoded in the actual source codes of the documents that people have been working on for a decade. So that's a really hard change to make. But of course, we don't want to create new instances of this problem.
Yeah, I do think we should be clear when we publish new things, whether we expect these to be consistent for machines to parse, or whether we're saying that this is expected to be human readable and the format may change over time. If you're parsing this by machine, go over here instead.
And does this, or do we expect that this link will exist forever, and is it okay if the content at this link changes? So we touched on this a couple of times earlier in the call, so. I don't know if we called out the link exists forever earlier, as, you know, if some link at docs.ietf.org exists once, is it then there for all of time? I don't think we've spoken to that directly in this call yet. And I'm thinking that people's brains are now fried, which is why I did not make this a 3-hour meeting.
I would say be clear when we put new URLs up what we think the status is and whether we you know that they're temporary things which may change or whether we are committing to them. And yes, people will grouch whatever we do, but we can at least point to the announcement that says, well, we told you it was going to change, you lose.
For my own edification, as far as I'm aware, the only URLs we have that are supposed to be archival and never change are the URLs for RFCs, correct?
Well,
Is that the expectation?
again, the problem is that we have all these dusty decks out there. People work on documents for a long, long time, and all these dusty decks have URIs encoded in them, or parts of URIs encoded in them. And of course, we are not prohibited from damaging these documents, but I think we want to keep the damage under control.
That's fair. It sounds like you have 3 classes of documents. You have archival URIs, you have please try not to change these URIs, and you have totally up for grabs URIs.
Yes.
Okay.
So, I think I'm going to suggest that we take the findability question, search and navigation, to another call, because I think that could fill another half hour at least. One of the services that people have asked for so far is the ability to keep their own copy of everything and keep their copy of everything in sync. So we have been providing this with FTP. We're currently providing it with HTTP and with rsync over HTTP. Do we need to change it? Is this something we need to continue to do? I think the answer is yes. I think that there's enough of the community that would get really upset if they couldn't keep their mirror and have their mirror easy to build. But should we just check everything into GitHub and let people get these things by Git? In addition to, not necessarily instead of, right? Or some other mechanism for distributing these things, shove them out into the AWS and put a very skinny page on top of it inside AWS for retrieval. Anybody have any thoughts at all, or is what we're doing now? I'm kind of starting to get keen on the check everything into Git and put a copy of it up at GitHub. Yep. We could put another copy of it up somewhere else, right? And this might be my solution for how I tear the data tracker apart from the web server, is that the data tracker instances work by whenever it has a new thing that it needs to store, it just checks it into Git. And other instances of the data tracker can refresh their Git, massive Git repository, so I have all kinds of scaling. And then when we want to build an rsync service, it just checks out and refreshes the repository on a schedule and just puts rsync over the result, an rsync server on top of the result.
So I think the thing we can get from Git here is to manage the evolution of all these other small things like charters and so on. That's currently very pedestrian, what's going on there. and we want to move these to Git as soon as possible. Whether we use Git to do the revision control of the actual documents, internet drafts, and RFCs, now that's maybe a different question.
Yep, at least my initial thinking of this is that, a file gets put in there and then it's never changed, right? It's just, these are the artifacts, like we create artifacts right now, and they're static. So it's just a monotonically growing, no element changes, abuse of something like get, so. If you have any other thoughts about what we are doing in this space, throw them
I don't
in.
have any opinions about how this is technically accomplished, but making it as easy as possible for people to make backups of any documents that you care about is one of the best ways of making sure your documents survive for the long term. So I would definitely recommend keeping the service and having it be as easy as possible for people to use it.
Yeah, I don't particularly get the Git thing because the revision control isn't as important as searchability and access and things.
Searchability and access is a function up on top of something else. Think of Git in this particular case as a database.
Yeah, but take something like Elasticsearch. That's, it's a thing that you shove stuff into, and it's built around the searchability and that kind of stuff around it. It doesn't matter what's underneath it, and that perhaps is and if you, as we all know, if you put stuff in that and inadvertently expose it on the internet, you have 1,000 hackers copy it for you. So that's our backup problem solved. But no, I mean, that might be just a different approach to look at a thing that is designed for sharing rather than a thing that is designed for correctness.
Yeah, well, the correctness is going to be important for solving the problem that I've got. It's splitting the data tracker from the website and for allowing multiple instances of the data tracker on different machines to run at the same time. Right? These files, these things are currently files in a file system. They got to be somewhere else, and Elasticsearch isn't where they're going to be. Elasticsearch may run over them, but and you can tell me if I'm wrong. If we can have a big Elasticsearch engine in the cloud, and I can go pick versions of draft out of it that put things in and pull things out of it that way, then maybe that's something I should be looking at. But the research I've done so far, that's not the right tool. All right, one bullet on here that we haven't touched on yet. Signing things. So we're signing RFCs, we're currently signing internet drafts, we've got a rickety mechanism that we're signing internet drafts with that we need to revise. So let's ask the question, do we continue signing them? Russ isn't here, he would say yes.
Yes.
So I'm hearing a yes from Carson. Is there anybody that's arguing that it's not worth the effort to continue this as a service?
Well, the important thing is not so much the signing, but the timestamping. So we have to run a timestamping service on these documents if we want to be usable as evidence of prior art in court cases. And that's, of course, extremely important for the IETF. I mean, there are other technologies to get that, but signing is definitely the cheapest way of doing this.
Yep. All right, well, we're 15 minutes over. Anybody have any anything else that they want to make sure that we talk about today? I think we covered a lot of ground, and we had some new ideas come out because of the conversation. So I'm very happy that everybody took a chunk out of their day to come together and talk about this. So I'll put together some notes. I'll go through the recording, make sure that things are covered. We can add to them. And if you go off and have thoughts after the call's over that, you know, you wish you'd brought up while we were talking, please send them to the tools list. So, awesome. Thank you. And I think we'll close.
Thank you all.
Thank you.